Jackie Morrison had always prided herself on being able to handle anything. 23 years of teaching third grade in Detroit had prepared her for a lot. Knife fights in the hallway? Check. Parents showing up drunk to parent-teacher conferences? Double check. That one kid who somehow managed to flush an entire ham sandwich down the toilet and flood the East Wing? Triple check with a side of therapy bills. But standing on the docking platform of Station Omega 7, staring at what looked like the aftermath of a particularly violent food fight mixed with a small war, Jackie was beginning to think she might have been a tiny bit overconfident about her abilities. "So," she said to the departing transport pilot, who was already backing toward his ship like he was afraid she might ask him to stay. "Where exactly is the person who's supposed to brief me on this situation?" The pilot, a nervous-looking guy with 3 eyes and what appeared to be a permanent twitch, just pointed at a hastily scrawled note taped to a nearby wall. In what Jackie could only assume was the galactic equivalent of crayon, someone had written, "Couldn't take it anymore. Good luck. Don't feed the rock creatures after midnight. P.S. The mushroom kid's spores are hallucinogenic." "That's it?" Jackie called after the pilot, but he was already sealing his ship's doors. The engine firing up drowned out whatever excuse he was probably making about having somewhere very important to be that wasn't here. Jackie crumpled the note and looked around at her new workplace. The Galactic Peace Corps recruiter had been very enthusiastic about this posting. A chance to shape young minds across the galaxy, he'd said. An opportunity to be at the forefront of interspecies education, he'd promised. What he hadn't mentioned was that interspecies education apparently meant try not to let 47 different kinds of alien children kill each other or you, or figuring out how to feed them. The station itself looked like someone had taken a space mall, filled it with the contents of several zoos, and then shaken it really hard. There were scorch marks on the walls, what appeared to be bite marks in the metal support beams, and a suspicious stain on the ceiling that was either some kind of alien bodily fluid or the remains of a really unfortunate food fight. A distant crash echoed through the corridors, followed by what sounded like a small explosion, and then something that might have been singing, if singing could cause structural damage. Jackie checked her tablet for the facility overview. 10,000 war orphans from 47 species, she read aloud. Ages ranging from newly hatched to adolescent equivalent. Previous caretaker lasted 72 hours before psychological breakdown. She looked up at another crash, this one closer. 72 hours? That's optimistic. The universal translator clipped to her ear crackled with static and then announced in a cheerful robot voice, "Translation matrix corrupted. Please contact technical support for repairs. Estimated wait time, 6 to 8 months. "Perfect," Jackie muttered. "So, I can't understand what anyone is saying. I have no idea what anyone eats, and my predecessor apparently fled in the middle of the night, leaving only cryptic warnings about mushroom spores." She shouldered her bag and headed toward what her tablet claimed was the main living area. The corridor was wide enough to accommodate something significantly larger than humans, which Jackie supposed made sense given that she was apparently now responsible for creatures she'd never heard of, from planets she couldn't pronounce. The first thing she noticed when she entered the main area was the smell. It wasn't exactly bad, just incredibly alien, like someone had mixed a petting zoo with a chemistry lab, and then added a hint of ozone from a lightning storm. The second thing she noticed was the noise. It wasn't quite chaos, but it was definitely Chaos's rowdy younger sibling. And the third thing she noticed was that everything had gone completely silent the moment she walked in, and approximately 10,000 pairs of eyes, in more colors and configurations than she'd known were possible, were now staring directly at her. "Well," Jackie said to the suddenly quiet room full of alien children, "this should be interesting." Somewhere in the back of the crowd, something that sounded like a tiny foghorn let out what she really hoped was a greeting and not a battle cry. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds, then all hell broke loose. The first disaster came in the form of what Jackie's broken translator helpfully identified as large, boulder entity before giving up entirely. The creature was roughly the size and shape of a small car, if cars were made of granite, and had glowing orange eyes. It had been sitting peacefully in what appeared to be a sandbox, until it noticed Jackie's presence, and decided the appropriate response was to eat the nearest piece of furniture. No, don't eat the..." Jackie started, but it was too late. The thing she would later learn was named Grunk, had already bitten a substantial chunk out of a table that looked like it was made of some kind of space-age polymer. He chewed thoughtfully for a moment, then made a sound like a rock tumbler having an existential crisis. "I'm guessing that didn't taste as good as it looked," Jackie said, just as the first wave of what appeared to be sentient electricity zipped past her head. The electricity resolved into two small, vaguely humanoid figures that flickered between solid and translucent, like someone was playing with a light switch. They were chasing each other in what might have been a game of tag, if tag typically involved phasing through solid objects and leaving scorch marks on everything they touched. "Bat Bob!" A tiny squeaky voice called out in perfect English. Jackie looked around frantically before spotting the source. A small, furry creature about the size of a hamster, standing on his hind legs with his tiny paws on his hips, in a pose that screamed military authority. "Return to formation this instant!" The electricity twins paused mid-chase and flickered back to solid form. They looked exactly like human children, if human children were made of contained lightning and had a tendency to accidentally phase through the floor when they got excited. "Sorry, Commander Squeaks," they said in unison, their voices crackling with static. Commander Squeaks. Jackie filed that away under things that make perfect sense in context but would sound insane anywhere else. "You must be the new caretaker," Commander Squeaks said, executing what Jackie was pretty sure was a textbook military salute despite being roughly the size of a tennis ball. "Commander Squeaks of the Zalaxian Defense Force, retired. Well, not technically retired so much as orphaned when my entire planet got blown up, but we don't need to dwell on that." Jackie blinked. "You're a commander? But you're small and adorable, yes. Very observant. My species reaches intellectual maturity at what most races consider infantile size. It's caused some diplomatic incidents." Squeaks gestured toward the electricity twins with one tiny paw. "Pip and Pop here are Vorthan energy beings. Excellent in battle, terrible at controlling their excitement levels. They've been phasing through the floor into the waste processing system on average 12 times per day." "Waste processing," Jackie repeated slowly. "Right. And the rock creature. Grunk. Lifeforce from the Granite Nebula region. His people consume silicon-based compounds for sustenance. Unfortunately, he can't tell the difference between actual food and synthetic materials. He's eaten approximately 47% of the furniture since arriving." Jackie watched as Grunk attempted to take another bite out of what she now realized was probably his dining table, made a disappointed grinding noise, and then tried to eat his chair instead. "And I'm guessing," Jackie said, as a sweet musical humming filled the air, "that our musical friend over there comes with his own set of challenges?" Commander Squeak's whiskers twitched in what might have been amusement. "Ah, you've noticed Boom Boom, mycelian youth. His species communicates through spore release. The humming means he's happy. The problem is that his happiness spores cause vivid hallucinations in most oxygen-breathing species." As if on cue, Jackie noticed that several of the other children had started staring at empty air with expressions of wonder and delight. One small reptilian creature was trying to pet something invisible while giggling hysterically. "How long do the hallucinations last?" Jackie asked, watching as a group of what looked like tiny dinosaurs began chasing colorful butterflies that definitely weren't there. "Oh, only about 6 hours. 8 if he gets really excited." Jackie closed her eyes and counted to 10. Then she counted to 20. Then she briefly considered counting to 100 before deciding that math wasn't going to solve this particular problem. "Right," she said, opening her eyes to see that Pip and Pop had gotten excited again and phased halfway through the floor, leaving just their heads and shoulders visible like the world's most dangerous whack-a-mole game. "So to summarize, I have a rock creature who eats furniture, twin electricity beings who phase through solid matter when happy, a hamster-sized military commander, and a mushroom child whose emotions cause mass hallucinations." "That's just the ones you've met in the first 5 minutes," Commander Squeaks said cheerfully. "There are 9,996 others." Jackie looked around at the chaos surrounding her. In the time they'd been talking, someone had apparently started a small fire which was being put out by what looked like a walking fishbowl, while a group of creatures that resembled angry Christmas trees were engaged in what might have been either a dance-off or a territorial dispute. "Commander Squeaks," Jackie said slowly, "what happened to the last caretaker? Really?" The tiny military officer's expression grew somber. "Well, the first day he tried to implement a traditional educational structure. Day 2, he attempted to separate everyone by species for efficiency. By day 3, he was found in his quarters rocking back and forth and mumbling something about too many variables and impossible logistics." Jackie nodded. "And how long did you say I was supposed to be here?" "Your contract states 18 months, renewable based on performance." 18 months. Jackie watched as Grunk finally gave up on the furniture and started eyeing the wall panels with interest, while Boom Boom's happy humming intensified and more of the kids began seeing things that weren't there. "Well," she said, "I've had worse Mondays." Jackie Morrison had always believed in the power of a good lesson plan. In Detroit, she'd survived budget cuts, overcrowded classrooms, and that memorable incident with the fire ants by sticking to 3 basic principles: structure, routine, and age-appropriate educational activities. Which is why, 48 hours into her new assignment, she decided to implement what she confidently called universal story time. How hard could it be? She'd muttered to herself while setting up the main gathering area. Stories are universal. Every culture has them. It's basically Anthropology 101. She'd even managed to jury-rig the broken translator to display visual stories on a large tablet, figuring that pictures would transcend language barriers. The story she'd chosen was simple, classic, and completely harmless: The 3 Little Pigs. What she hadn't counted on was Grunk's reaction to seeing pictures of houses made of different materials. "Once upon a time," Jackie began, holding up the tablet to show a charming illustration of 3 pig brothers, "there were 3 little pigs who each built a house." The crowd of alien children settled in with what she interpreted as interest. Even Commander Squeaks had positioned himself on a makeshift podium for a better view, while Pip and Pop flickered with contained excitement. "The first little pig built his house out of straw," Jackie continued, swiping to show the straw house. "That's when Grunk made his first attempt to eat the tablet." "No, Grunk, that's not." Jackie yanked the device away just as massive stone fingers closed around empty air. "It's just a picture, you can't actually eat." But Grunk had apparently decided that if he couldn't eat the pictures of houses, he'd settle for the next best thing. With a grinding sound like continental drift, he turned toward the nearest wall and took an experimental bite out of the station's hull. "Stop! You can't eat the walls!" Jackie shouted, but her broken translator converted this into what sounded like a recipe for wall soup, which only encouraged him. The hull breach alarm started blaring. "Emergency! Emergency!" the station's AI announced in a tone of barely contained panic. "Hull integrity compromised. Initiating emergency protocols." That's when Pip and Pop got excited. When Vorthan energy beings get excited, they don't just phase through solid matter. They phase through everything, including floors, while crackling with enough electricity to power a small city. Which is exactly what they did, disappearing through the floor in twin flashes of lightning. "Pip, Pop, get back here!" Commander Squeak shouted in his tiny but surprisingly authoritative voice, but it was too late. A new alarm joined the first one. "Warning. Warning! Electrical anomaly detected in waste processing system. Initiating emergency flush protocols." "Oh no," Jackie said, just as the sound of rushing water echoed through the station's ventilation system. Meanwhile, Boom Boom had gotten stressed by all the alarms and shouting. When mycelians get stressed, they release spores. Lots of spores. Within seconds, half the children in the room were staring at the walls with expressions of wonder and delight. A group of small reptilian creatures had started trying to climb what they apparently saw as a magnificent crystal mountain, but was actually just Jackie's leg. The walking fishbowl creature was attempting to have a deep philosophical conversation with a ceiling light fixture. "This is fine," Jackie said to herself, watching as Grunk took another bite out of the wall, while sparks showered down from the ceiling where Pip and Pop were presumably wreaking havoc in the station's electrical systems. "This is totally manageable." The station's AI chose that moment to deliver the final blow. "Attention, incoming priority message from Galactic Command. Quote, routine inspection scheduled for tomorrow at 800 hours. Performance evaluation in progress. Failure to meet minimum standards will result in immediate reassignment of all inhabitants." End quote. Jackie stared at the chaos around her. Grunk was now methodically eating his way through what she was pretty sure was a load-bearing wall. The hallucinating children had formed some kind of conga line and were dancing around invisible obstacles. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear what sounded like a waterfall, which definitely wasn't supposed to be part of a space station's normal operational sounds. Commander Squeaks appeared at her feet, having apparently rappelled down from his observation post, using what looked like dental floss. "Ma'am," he said with military precision, "I believe we may have a situation." "A situation," Jackie repeated. Above them, the lights flickered as another electrical surge pulsed through the station. "Commander Squeaks, this isn't a situation. This is a complete disaster." "Yes, ma'am. Shall I begin evacuation procedures?" Jackie looked around at the chaos, at Grunk, who had paused in his wall-eating to look at her with what she was beginning to recognize as concern, at the hallucinating children who were still dancing but had started incorporating her into their invisible obstacle course, at Boom Boom, whose spores were shifting from stress yellow to apologetic blue, as he realized what had happened. These kids had already lost everything, their homes, their families, their entire worlds in some cases. And now some bureaucrat from Galactic Command was going to show up tomorrow and decide they needed to be split up and shipped off to different facilities because their human caretaker couldn't handle story time without causing a station-wide emergency. No, Jackie said firmly. No evacuation procedures. We're going to figure this out. Commander Squeak's tiny eyebrows rose. Ma'am, with respect, Pip and Pop are currently stuck in the waste processing system. Grunk has eaten through to the secondary hull, half our population is chemically altered, and Galactic Command arrives in 16 hours. I've dealt with worse, Jackie said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. I once had a kid flush a Thanksgiving dinner down the toilet during a parent-teacher conference. This is just bigger. The sound of rushing water grew louder, punctuated by the distinctive crackle of electricity, and what might have been Pip and Pop trying to sing the Vorthan national anthem. Much bigger, Jackie amended, but we can handle it. We just need to think outside the box. What box? Asked one of the hallucinating children, reaching out to touch what he apparently saw floating in the air next to Jackie's head. That's actually a very good question, Jackie muttered, as the lights went out completely and the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In the sudden dim light, with alarms blaring, and water rushing, and children giggling at invisible wonders, Jackie Morrison realized that every educational theory she'd ever learned was about to be completely useless. Tomorrow, she was either going to revolutionize interspecies childcare or get fired in spectacular fashion. Possibly both. Jackie Morrison had spent most of her adult life believing that the key to good teaching was control. Structured lessons, organized activities, clear rules and expectations. It was a philosophy that had served her well in Detroit, where the biggest challenge was usually keeping 30 human kids focused on fractions for 45 minutes. But at 3 a.m, sitting in the station's emergency control room while coordinating repairs to the hull breach, the flooded waste processing system, and the electrical grid, Jackie was beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, she'd been thinking about this whole thing wrong. The revelation came when she heard laughter. Not the manic giggling of hallucinating children or the grinding chuckle that Grunk made when he found something particularly tasty to eat. This was genuine, joyful laughter, echoing through the corridors from somewhere deeper in the station. Jackie followed the sound, stepping carefully around the puddles that marked Pip and Pop's impromptu tour of the plumbing system. The laughter grew louder as she approached what her station map claimed was Storage Bay 7, though she was pretty sure it hadn't been a storage bay when she'd arrived. She peered around the corner and stopped dead. The kids had built something. Not just built it, but engineered it. What looked like the most elaborate playground equipment she'd ever seen stretched across the entire bay, incorporating salvaged furniture, pieces of the wall that Grunk had eaten, and what appeared to be carefully redirected water from the flooded processing system. Pip and Pop were phasing in and out of solid platforms, their electrical discharges powering a series of lights that illuminated the structure in shifting patterns. But they weren't doing it randomly. They were following some kind of complex sequence, coordinated perfectly with Grunk's movements as he used his massive strength to raise and lower different platforms. Commander Squeak stood on a central command post, giving what looked like tactical instructions to various groups of children. His tiny voice carried perfectly in the acoustics they'd somehow created, and Jackie realized with a start that everyone was following his directions not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. And Boom Boom sat in the center of it all, humming quietly. But his spores weren't causing random hallucinations. They were creating synchronized visual effects that complemented the light show from Pip and Pop, adding layers of color and movement that turned the entire structure into something between a playground and a work of art. Jackie watched as a small group of the reptilian children used the coordinated platforms to reach a high ledge, while the walking fishbowl creature provided some kind of aquatic cooling system for parts of the structure that got too hot from the electrical discharges. Every species was contributing something unique, and somehow it all worked together. "It's beautiful," Jackie whispered. "Ma'am?" Commander Squeaks had noticed her and was attempting something like a salute while balancing on a beam that was definitely not designed for creatures his size. "What is this?" she asked, stepping into the bay and looking up at the elaborate construction. "Emergency Integration Protocol," Squeaks replied promptly. When standard facility operations failed, the inhabitants initiated collaborative survival strategies based on individual species capabilities. You built this in 6 hours? 5 hours and 37 minutes, ma'am. We would have finished sooner, but Grunk kept trying to eat the support beams until we convinced him they were load-bearing and therefore off-limits for consumption. Jackie walked deeper into the structure, marveling at the engineering. Every surface was designed to accommodate multiple species simultaneously. Rough patches for creatures that needed grip, smooth slides for those that preferred to glide, platforms at different heights for different sizes, and what looked like carefully calculated ventilation to prevent Boom Boom's spores from becoming overwhelming. "Who designed this?" she asked. "We all did," said a voice, and Jackie realized that her broken translator was somehow working perfectly, not because it had been repaired, but because the children had spent the last 6 hours teaching each other their languages. The voice belonged to one of the reptilian children, a small green creature who was perched on what looked like a jungle gym designed by alien architects. "Grunk knows structural engineering from watching his people build in the asteroid fields," the child continued in perfectly understandable English. "Pip and Pop understand energy flow and electrical systems. Commander Squeaks has tactical planning and logistics. Boom Boom's spores can create shared visual experiences when properly controlled. The Aquatic Collective," she gestured toward the fishbowl creature, "specializes in environmental regulation." "And you?" Jackie asked. "We're translators, the Saurian Linguistic Corps. Before the war, our people served as diplomatic interpreters. We learn languages fast." Jackie looked around at the organized chaos, finally understanding what she was seeing. This wasn't just a playground. It was a community, a functioning, collaborative society that had formed naturally, when left to its own devices. "How many languages are you all speaking right now?" she asked. "All of them," Commander Squeaks replied. 47 species, 47 primary languages, approximately 312 dialects and specialized vocabularies. Current translation accuracy is 96.4% and improving. Jackie sat down heavily on what appeared to be a bench perfectly designed for her human proportions. "You learned 47 languages in 6 hours. Children are adaptable," said another voice, this one coming from what looked like a walking Christmas tree, but was apparently one of the Arbolian youth. "Adults make it complicated. We just figure it out." "But the educational standards," Jackie said weakly. "The structured curriculum, the species-specific learning requirements." "Ma'am," Commander Squeak said gently, "with respect, we don't need to learn how to be our individual species. We already know that. What we needed to learn was how to be together." Jackie looked up at the structure they'd built, at the seamless integration of abilities and needs, at children from dozens of worlds who'd figured out in one night what the galaxy's greatest minds apparently hadn't managed in decades of diplomatic negotiations. "And I've been trying to teach you separately," she said. "You've been trying to teach us like humans," Pip said, flickering into view on a platform above her head. "Which makes sense," Pop added, appearing on her other side. "You're human." "But we're not," said Boom Boo, and his spores shifted to what Jackie was beginning to recognize as colors of gentle amusement rather than stress or happiness. Jackie stood up and looked around at her students, really looked at them, maybe for the first time. Not as problems to be solved or educational challenges to be managed, but as kids who'd already survived more than most adults ever would, and who were teaching her something she'd never learned in any education program. "So," she said slowly, "what if we forgot everything the Galactic Education Code says about proper interspecies instruction?" "That would be highly irregular," Commander Squeak said, but his whiskers were twitching and what she'd learned was his equivalent of a smile. "Good," Jackie said. "I've always been better with irregular." She pulled out her tablet and started making notes, not lesson plans but ideas. What if math class involved calculating the physics of Grunk's construction projects? What if language arts meant expanding their translation network? What if science class meant figuring out how to safely regulate Boom Boom's spores or optimize Pip and Pop's electrical output? What if, instead of trying to educate them despite their differences, she helped them learn because of them? "All right," she said, looking up at her students, her collaborators. "We've got 12 hours until the inspection. Anyone want to help me figure out how to explain to Galactic Command that everything they think they know about education is wrong?" The answering cheer, in 47 different languages but somehow perfectly synchronized, told her everything she needed to know about whether this was going to work. Inspector Clickstar of the Galactic Educational Standards Authority had seen a lot of disasters in his 43 years of service. He'd witnessed classrooms where the furniture had achieved sentience and staged a revolt, He'd documented facilities where the students had accidentally opened interdimensional portals during basic mathematics instruction. He'd even filed a report on that memorable incident where an entire academy had been temporarily converted into a musical by an overly enthusiastic drama teacher. But nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for what he found when he docked at Station Omega 7. The first sign that something was wrong was that the docking bay was clean. Not just functional, but actually organized, with clearly marked areas for different types of vessels, and what appeared to be a small welcome committee of various alien children holding signs in multiple languages that read, "Welcome Inspector Clickstar," with startling grammatical accuracy. Clickstar checked his tablet. According to his files, Station Omega 7 should be a barely controlled disaster zone, overseen by an inexperienced human teacher who was probably cowering in her quarters by now. Instead, he was being greeted by what looked like a perfectly orchestrated diplomatic reception. "Inspector Clickstar," said a tiny voice with unmistakable military precision. "Commander Squeaks of the Zalaxian Defense Force, current logistics coordinator for Station Omega 7 Educational Cooperative. Permission to escort you to the main facility?" Clickstar looked down at the small creature, then at his tablet, then back at the creature. "You're a child." "Technically correct, sir. Chronologically, I am approximately 7 standard years old. However, Zalaxian neural development follows different patterns than most species. I achieved tactical certification before my first molting." This was already going off script. Clickstar consulted his notes. "Where is Caretaker Morrison?" "Currently coordinating the advanced multi-species engineering demonstration, sir. She'll meet us in the main facility." "Advanced multi-species engineering," Clickstar repeated slowly. "That's not on the approved curriculum list." "No, sir," Commander Squeaks agreed cheerfully. "Shall we proceed?" As they walked through the corridors, Clickstar noted that everything was not only functional but actually improved. The scorch marks he'd expected to find had been replaced by what looked like decorative lighting. The walls showed no signs of structural damage, and the air smelled like a functional life support system instead of the chaos he'd been told to expect. "Commander Squeaks," he said as they walked, "my reports indicated that this facility was experiencing significant operational difficulties." "That's correct, sir. 48 hours ago, we experienced hull breaches, electrical system failures, flooding, and mass chemical alteration of approximately 50% of the population." Clickstar stopped walking. "And now?" "Now we've integrated those incidents into our educational framework. The hull breach became a lesson in structural engineering and emergency repair. The electrical failures led to an advanced course in energy management. The flooding incident resulted in innovations in water reclamation and environmental systems. And the chemical alteration event provided valuable data on cross-species neurochemistry and perception studies." They entered the main facility, and Clickstar's clipboard slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. The space had been completely transformed. What should have been a standard institutional layout had become something that looked like the intersection of a university laboratory, an art installation, and the most elaborate playground ever conceived. Children from dozens of species moved through the space with obvious purpose, working in integrated groups that seemed to shift and flow based on the tasks at hand. In one area, the rock creature Clickstar's files identified as Grunk, structural liability, was carefully demonstrating load-bearing calculations to a mixed group of students while they built what appeared to be a scale model of a space station. The calculations were being translated in real time by a group of small reptilian creatures, while twin energy beings provided controlled electrical demonstrations. In another section, a mycelian youth was working with various species to create what looked like a complex chemical reaction, but the spores being released were forming intricate patterns in the air that corresponded to mathematical equations being displayed on nearby screens. "What exactly am I looking at?" Clickstar asked. "Integrated curriculum design," said a voice behind him. He turned to see a human female who looked tired but somehow more alert than anyone had a right to be after managing this chaos. "You must be Inspector Clickstar. I'm Jackie Morrison." "Caretaker Morrison, your preliminary reports indicated total facility failure." "Oh, that definitely happened," Jackie said cheerfully. "Turns out that trying to force 47 different species into a one-size-fits-all educational model doesn't work very well. Who knew?" Clickstar consulted his tablet frantically. "But the regulations clearly state that interspecies education requires standardized approaches to ensure equality of—" "Inspector," Commander Squeaks interrupted politely, "would you like to see our current educational outcomes assessment?" Before Kickstar could respond, the small creature had projected a holographic display showing statistics that made no sense. Language acquisition rates that exceeded theoretical maximums. Problem-solving scores that suggested the students were operating at graduate levels. Collaborative efficiency ratings that were literally off the charts he used for evaluation. "This data is impossible," he said. "That's what I thought too," Jackie said. "Turns out impossible is just another word for we haven't figured out how to measure it yet." She gestured around the room. "You want to see a demonstration? Hey everyone, we've got a visitor who'd like to understand what we're doing here." The response was immediate. Without any apparent coordination, the various groups began shifting their activities to create what looked like a single complex performance. Grunk and his engineering team started building a miniature version of their space station model while providing running commentary on structural dynamics. The translation corps began simultaneously rendering the explanation into dozens of languages. Pip and Pop created an electrical display that illustrated the concepts being discussed, while Boom Boom's controlled spore release added visual elements that somehow made the entire presentation more comprehensible. Other species contributed specialized knowledge in real time: atmospheric dynamics, gravitational calculations, materials science, diplomatic protocol, and at least 6 subjects that Clickstar was pretty sure hadn't been invented yet. The entire demonstration lasted exactly 7 minutes and covered more ground than most university-level engineering courses managed in a full semester. When it finished, the room fell silent except for the soft humming of various pieces of equipment and Boom Boom's contented musical purring. Clickstar looked at his evaluation forms, then at the room full of children who were watching him with polite attention, then back at his forms. "This violates approximately 437 educational regulations," he said finally. "Probably," Jackie agreed. "Does it work?" Clickstar looked around the room again, at children who'd lost their homes, their families, their entire worlds, but who'd somehow built something new together. Something that worked, not despite their differences, but because of them. He began, then stopped. "I need to make some calls." "Take your time," Jackie said. "We'll be here, all of us." And as Clickstar walked back toward his ship to figure out how to explain to Galactic Command that everything they thought they knew about education was apparently wrong, he could hear the sound of 47 different languages blending into something that sounded suspiciously like a celebration. 6 months later, Jackie Morrison stood in what used to be Storage Bay 7 and watched a group of crystalline hegemony youngsters attempt to explain quantum mechanics to a delegation of Galactic Educational Authority officials. The crystals were doing their explanation through harmonic resonance, which the translation corps was rendering into approximately 12 different languages simultaneously, while Boom Boom provided visual accompaniment that made the quantum equations appear as dancing fractals in the air. The officials looked like they were having the kind of migraine that came from watching everything you thought you knew about physics get casually rewritten by children who weren't even old enough to vote in most galactic democracies. Anders Squeaks asked, appearing at Jackie's elbow with a steaming cup of what had become her favorite morning beverage, a blend of human coffee and Zalaxian energy supplements that probably violated several interspecies health codes but kept her functional on 4 hours of sleep. "Well, the Andorian education minister just asked if we could send a team to redesign their entire university system," Jackie said, sipping her questionably legal coffee. "And the vegan collective wants to know if we can teach their diplomatic corps how to communicate with the Silicon-based alliance." Standard Tuesday, then. Jackie laughed. 6 months ago, she'd thought her biggest challenge would be keeping alien children from accidentally killing each other. Now she was running what the Galactic Education Authority had officially designated as the Omega-7 Experimental Interspecies Learning Cooperative, which was bureaucrats speak for "we have no idea what you're doing, but please don't stop." Her tablet chimed with an incoming message, and Jackie's eyebrows rose as she read it. "Well, that's interesting." Good, interesting. Or Grunk just ate another load-bearing wall, interesting. The good kind. Remember that outbreak of warfare between the methane breathers and the oxygen coalition that's been going on for the past 3 years? The one where they can't even be in the same room because they'll literally poison each other just by breathing? That's the one. Apparently their ambassadors want to send their children here to see if we can figure out a way for them to coexist. Commander Squeak's whiskers twitched thoughtfully. Atmospheric incompatibility is definitely a new challenge, though I suppose we managed to work out the Grunk situation. Jackie glanced over to where Grunk was carefully constructing what appeared to be a molecular gastronomy laboratory, having finally learned the difference between food-grade silicon compounds and structural support materials. The breakthrough had come when the kids figured out that he wasn't trying to be destructive. He just couldn't tell the difference between nutrition and furniture. Now he was one of their best chemistry teachers, though they'd had to reinforce most of the station to handle his enthusiastic demonstrations. Speaking of new challenges, Jackie said, how's the integration going with the new arrivals? The Hive Mind Collective is adapting well. They find our individualistic approach fascinating, and they're teaching the others about distributed problem solving. The time-dilated species is still adjusting. They experience everything at roughly 3 times our temporal rate, so we're working on communication protocols. And the energy parasites are, well, they're not actually parasite. It turns out, they're just very efficient at energy absorption. Pip and Pop are teaching them about consensual electrical exchange. Jackie nodded, making notes on her tablet. When she'd first arrived at Station Omega-7, her biggest concern had been keeping 10,000 war orphans alive. Now she was running what had somehow become the galaxy's premier research facility for interspecies cooperation, with a waiting list that included diplomats, scientists, and apparently several governments who'd decided that if anyone could figure out how to make impossible species combinations work together, it was a bunch of kids who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to lose except each other. "Miss Jackie," called a familiar voice, and she looked up to see one of the Saurian translators approaching with what appeared to be a small parade of youngsters from at least 8 different species. "The new intake group is here for orientation." Jackie looked at the group of new arrivals, recent refugees from a border conflict she'd been following in the news. They looked exactly like every group that had arrived over the past months, scared, exhausted, and convinced that they were fundamentally incompatible with everyone else in the universe. "All right, everyone," she said, addressing the new arrivals with the confidence that came from 6 months of practice at making impossible things work. "Welcome to Station Omega-7. I know you've all been told that your species can't coexist, that your biological needs are incompatible, and that the best we can hope for is separate facilities where you won't accidentally harm each other." The youngsters nodded warily, clustering with their own species and eyeing the others with varying degrees of suspicion and fear. "Here's the thing about that," Jackie continued, gesturing around the room where the established residents were going about their daily activities with casual cooperation that would have been considered impossible by every xenobiologist in the galaxy. 6 months ago, I had a rock creature who couldn't stop eating our walls, energy beings who kept phasing through the floor into our waste processing system, and a mushroom kid whose emotions caused mass hallucinations. Today, Grunk is teaching advanced materials science, Pip and Pop are running our electrical engineering department, and Boom Boom's spore control techniques are being studied by therapeutic researchers across 3 sectors. She smiled at the new arrivals, remembering her own first day and how completely unprepared she'd been for what she'd found. "The secret isn't that we figured out how to make different species get along despite their differences. The secret is that we stopped trying to make you get along despite your differences and started helping you succeed because of them." A small creature that looked like a mobile crystal formation raised what might have been a hand. "But the atmospheric requirements are a fascinating engineering challenge that I'm pretty sure someone in this room has already started working on," Jackie interrupted. "Commander Squeaks, would you mind showing our new friends to the integration area? I believe there are several ongoing projects that could use their particular expertise." As the group headed off, accompanied by the usual multilingual chatter that had become the soundtrack of daily life on Station Omega-7, Jackie's tablet chimed with another message. This one made her grin. "More good news?" Commander Squeaks asked, having lingered behind to coordinate the new arrival logistics. "Publisher wants to expand the book deal. Apparently Chaos Theory, an elementary guide to managing the impossible, is being translated into over 200 languages. They want to know if I'd be interested in a lecture tour. Are you?" Jackie looked around at the controlled chaos that had become her life, at children who'd survived wars, displacement, and loss, who'd built something together that no adult authority had thought possible, at a space station that had gone from emergency disaster zone to cutting-edge research facility because a bunch of kids had been too young to know that what they were doing was supposed to be impossible. "Not a chance," she said. "I've got the best job in the galaxy right here." Another alarm chimed, but this one was the soft tone that meant interesting development rather than the blaring alert that meant catastrophic emergency. Jackie checked her tablet. "What is it now?" Commander Squeaks asked. "Apparently the quantum crystalline youngsters have figured out how to create stable temporal pockets. They want to know if they can use it to give everyone more time to finish their projects." "Ah. Shall I add elementary temporal mechanics to tomorrow's lesson plan?" Jackie grinned. "Make it an elective. We don't want to overwhelm the new kids." as she headed off to see what other impossible things her students had accomplished while she wasn't looking. Jackie Morrison reflected that she'd learned more about teaching in 6 months of complete chaos than she had in 23 years of structured curriculum. Turned out the secret to educating the galaxy wasn't better lesson plans or stricter standards. It was just giving kids the tools they needed and then getting out of their way while they built the future. Even if that future occasionally involved temporal mechanics, edible furniture, and diplomatic solutions that required hazmat suits. After all, she was a teacher. She'd handled worse things than impossible situations. She'd handled worse things than possible ones, too.